Welcome to our Depth of Knowledge PowerPoint presentation. The depth of knowledge is actually not asimilar to Bloom's taxonomy, except it refers to how you assess students and the work that they're doing, as opposed to just the activities that you're doing or kinds of the questioning that you're doing. And it really was adapted from a model used by Norman Webb at the University of Wisconsin, and he used it to align standards to the actual assessments that he was giving to his students. You've heard about the Common Core Standards, which is what this course is designed to help us prepare for, and the Council of Chief State School Officers, which is the group of governors who got together and decided that it was necessary to have standardized instruction across all the states, or standard set of, or common set of standards. They used this process to help as well. And what you can see here on the screen, is that it is really a mechanism to ensure that the intent of the standard and the level of the student demonstration required by that standard matches the assessment item. So in other words, what you're assessing is really aligned to the standard and not just sort of aligned, or it asks the question at a surface level but goes as deep as the standard is requesting that it would be. So let's look at the levels of Webb's depth of knowledge. There are 4 of them: recall and reproduction, skills and concepts, strategic thinking, and extended thinking. We're primarily going to focus on those first 3. The 4th one would be a lot harder to do on a standardized assessment. That's really going to be more your long-term projects. So at level 1, these are the things that quite frankly, we do way too often of. This is basic recall of information. I'll give you a minute to look at that. So it's really a simple process. Recall, one-word answers, maybe a sentence, but it's still recall information. Here are some examples. Okay, in Webb's depth of knowledge 2, at the level 2, this is where we start to get a little more rigorous in our assessment of what we expect our students to know and be able to do. And this goes certainly beyond recall, and it does require mental processing that really is more engaging than just that level 1. It really does imply that there's more than one mental process. So students are going to have to think through at least 2 processes in a level 2. Let me give you some examples to help better solidify it. So we're asking students to compare things, summarize major events, not just identify them, but really sort of summarize them. Predicting logical outcomes, classifying information, describing things. So students have to be able to know it as well as be able to explain it to somebody else, summarize it, things of that nature, not just recall it or identify it. Let's take a look at level 3. This particular level, strategic thinking, goes beyond what we certainly are doing in many of our classrooms. DOK requires deep understanding. This is a much more demanding cognitive reasoning for students. And an assessment item, even if it's multiple choice, might have more than one possible answer. It likely would require students to justify the response they'd give. Let me give you some examples of what strategic thinking might look like. Solving multiple step problems and be able to support the answers with a mathematical explanation, or to justify their responses to things. Here are some more examples. Developing a scientific model, actually creating a dance that represents the characteristics of a culture. So they're going to have to do some interpretation there. They have to understand what the culture is, they have to understand what those characteristics are, and then they need to be able to put those characteristics of a culture into a dance. That's a much more demanding cognitive process. And clearly, there's no question in your mind if students are capable of doing these things that you see at level 3. Here on the first page, as well as the second page, there is no question that students have a deep understanding of what you're expecting them to know and be able to do. All right, a level 4, this is extended thinking. This is really high cognitive demanding. And really, it's not just a long-term project. There are lots of ways to look at long-term projects. I'll give you an example of that right here. All of these things would be considered long time, so extended time is not just the only factor. If I ask students to collect data over time, or let me give you an example, if I ask students to record temperature every day for several months, all I'm doing is asking them to record really basic level 1 kind of thinking. But if I ask students to take that information and organize it in a chart, well, now I've moved to a level 2, because I'm asking them to record it. That's the basic recall, but then do something with that data. They have to determine how to organize it. That's a level 2. If I then ask them to take that data that they've organized in a chart and use that information to make some predictions about what future weather might be during those same months in future years, or what might happen now that we've collected it for 6 months, what the chart might look like opposite the next 6 months. That would be making some predictions and justifying their work. That's strategic thinking. Still long term, but not to the level of Webb's depth of knowledge level 4. A level 4 would be asking students to take all this information and maybe some additional research and apply it to a new situation. So maybe we ask students to create a model for the future to predict weather based on the information that they've been gathering. That would be an example of a much more extended thinking, or a level 4. Here are examples of level 4. Analyzing the author's craft. So in that case, I might have to look at 3 or 4 different pieces of literature written by the same author and see if I can't figure out what that author's style is, what their particular bias is. And I might need to do more than just read the things they've written. I might need to do some research on that author to be able to determine why they're writing this way. What are their political biases? What are their personal biases? What things have occurred in their life that would make them write in this direction? That's a much more involved process. If we could do this once or twice a year, that would be incredible. What I'm really going to be looking for in this class is for you to start doing more 2s and 3s, a lot more 3s. You're probably already doing many 2s and occasionally a 3, but really to be doing more 2s and 3s. Your students will be much more successful on the state assessments that are coming, and then if in fact our state at any point would go to the national assessments, they would be much more capable of answering those as well. And you're also going to be doing a better job of preparing our students to be college and career ready. So I don't care if you're a preschool teacher or a 12th grade teacher or what subject you teach, you can see I've given you examples at all levels as well as all content areas, lots of things that we can do here. Here's some more examples of a level 4. Now, it's not uncommon for us to ask, especially at the elementary level or even at the high school level, for kids to put on a play. But how often do we ask them to write and produce and design the whole thing? Okay, another important thing is we often think in terms of Bloom's taxonomy that verbs dictate what level of questioning we're asking our students. But in Webb's depth of knowledge, it's really not about the verb, but the context in which the verb is used. Let me give you a few examples of that. Here we're asking students to describe something, but it's a level 3. Describe a model that you might use to represent the relationships that exist within the rock cycle. Describe the difference between metamorphic and igneous rocks. Describe 3 characteristics of metamorphic rock. You can see that use describe each time, but I'm just doing simple recall when I'm asking them to identify the characteristics. If I ask them to describe the differences or compare 2 different types of rock, now that's a little more involved. They have to know the characteristics for recall purposes, but they also need to be able to know them well enough they can do a comparison. The other thing is to keep in mind that the levels can be cumulative. An item or standard written to a DOK 3 often contains DOK 1 and 2 level demands within it. So students might need to do some things at a level 1 or a level 2 to ultimately be able to answer that level 3 question. So here's some important things to remember as we're moving forward. The depth of knowledge is a scale of cognitive demand. It requires looking at the assessment item and the standard, not the student or the student's work, in order to determine the level. It's about the item and the standard, not the student. So are you assessing what what the standard is asking you to assess? And the context of the assessment item or standard must be considered to determine the DOK, not just look at what verb was chosen. So you really need to be looking at what was assessed to determine whether or not, or what a particular level is.